Thank you so much for joining us. And I am really excited about this conversation. This is so different, right, than any conversation I think I've had on my podcast, but stuff that I either am having in my own mind or private conversations off the radar. And so we're going to do a deeper dive. So I want to welcome Ashley-Nicole Russell, who is a family law attorney in North Carolina and the author of a book called, and I want to get it right, The Cure for Divorce Culture, available on Amazon as well. So thank you, Ashley, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love a deep dive. There's always a good information in a deep dive.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so the thing that I'm really excited to kind of kick off with, right, is the history of the divorce process. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did we get to where we're at today?
So, as you know, the divorce world is a little bit of a war zone. And so that kind of has evolved over time. It didn't really start out that way. In fact, it started with Reagan introducing no fault divorce when he was the governor in California. And then from there, we moved forward to where, it spread basically west. It was off the back of the feminist movement where women could file now. Before, you couldn't file unless you had been abused or unless your husband cheated. Women couldn't. And that was pretty standard. And then all of a sudden they could file for no fault, no reason. But no fault divorce really, it sounds nice, sounds amicable, but then it kind of evolved into this other thing where the dockets got very clogged. There were so many filings all at once. Attorneys were billing hourly and it was taking forever to get it done, just because so many people were filing. And then there were all of these different issues that we had to split property. Then there was like a cash flow conversation, like how are we going to maintain two different households? And then children and custody evolved and child support. And so it created kind of an industry of divorce. And then that industry started having time frames. It would take you X amount of years. Well, if it takes you X amount of years and your attorney's billing hourly, how much is that? And it ended up becoming a $55 billion industry a year in America. And almost all of that is attorney's fees, and almost none of it is court cost. And so it's kind of interesting that it became an industry. So there's the economics of divorce. And if you look in my book, there's a graph actually of the inverse reaction of what happened. So as the divorce rates went up, the marriage rates went down. And so now we are in the lowest marriage rates of all of recorded history, lower than the Great Depression and both world wars. And so it's just we've ebbed and flowed. Now we're again in another peak of divorce here in America. But I will say, off the back of the pandemic, whereas this became a very aggressive landscape where, so many filings were happening and it was taking so long that it was creating this level of animosity and just the unknown of divorce gets people very heightened in terms of their emotions. And so it became, due to the amount of animosity that was kind of being pumped into it, and the criminal or the civil system not being a place to be able to really deal with the family context and children and things like that, the system got to be really broken. And a lot of people view it as, a sort of legalized extortion. That's kind of an extreme view of it. But I think that what really happened was it was an industry that wasn't supposed to be in a civil context in the court system and litigation. And now it is. And we've got to kind of figure it out. But after the pandemic, it has really switched course to where people are really saying, the court system closed down for how long? Obviously, maybe we don't need the court system. Maybe we can do this on our own. We have so much conflict at home just dealing with the world today. We don't want to interject ourselves into even more conflict at family court. How can we avoid that? And so we have seen a huge uptick since COVID in out of court divorce settlements. And that's where collaborative lives and breeds.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I have so many thoughts, right? And I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but I do want to say something. And that is that, yes, I love the whole inverse reaction because that was part of like the financial language. We'll say, hey, interest rates go up and bond prices go down. And then when bond prices go up, anyways, love the inverse reaction or inverse relationship conversation. But one of the things that I think is really important is that, yes, divorce rates, let's say that they are, falling because people aren't getting married because either they've gotten divorced and don't get remarried, or maybe they're not getting married at all. But I think what's happening, though, from an empowerment standpoint, that I think is really important for us to mention is I had a woman call, had been with somebody for 20 years, wasn't married, He handled all the things. He was a contractor for a building company, owned the company. They had multiple properties. All the investments were in his name, and she decided to part ways. And she said, "Can you help me? Do you have a prenup? Nope. Do you have an estate plan? Nope. I can't help you." I mean, there was not a whole lot that I could do to help her at that point because she didn't fall under, the rules related to getting a divorce. And yet there wasn't anything in place to, offset that, to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And so I think there's this aspect of like, okay, marriage is not necessarily the key problem. I think it comes down to making sure that people have the documents that they need in place to protect themselves, no matter what that situation looks like. Because there are laws in place now, even though I do agree that the system is broken, to help somewhat level the playing field and at least have some parameters around how things can get split: alimony, child support, property division, of course, based on each respective state. But
Right.
any other thoughts or any comments around that concept?
Yes, I think people just need to make informed decisions. I think that's the biggest thing about this, is that you need to be more involved in what it is that you have and the landscape of what your life looks like. And then, whenever you're parceling through divorce, in a lot of ways, I say that it's a chess game. Like, you really want to be sitting up, looking down at the board so that you're making good, informed decisions. And I think that having that, a lot of times though, in a marriage, not sharing financial information is a lot of what leads to the breakdown of a marriage. And so, but I do think it's important to share financial information, to know what your accounts look like while you're married, so that you can be prepared if you ever need to be able to pick up the finances for any reason. Someone gets sick or is not able to,
Yeah.
be present. I do think it's really important. And just one thing to clarify, the divorce rates are not going down. They're going up. The marriage rates are going down. So it's a very
Got
interesting
it.
thing that's happening. Yes.
Yes.
And
Okay,
so
thank you.
since the pandemic, the divorce rates had leveled out a little bit since the pandemic. They're going back up. And the
Totally.
marriage rates have been plummeting since, for a while, since, I think my book captures until 2010, and they were on a steep decline then. So it's a
Interesting.
very interesting concept that we have here in America.
Yeah, for sure.
Settling outside of court helps that a lot, though. It helps relieve the fear factor around getting married, because it alleviates the fear factor around getting divorced. Right now, we have all these generations of adult children of divorce who went through their parents', battlefield landscape of marriage and divorce. And now, they're trying to correct that. And the pendulum's kind of swinging back to that out of court settlement space where people are able to manage their finances, keep their finances, not spend them on attorney's fees. Sometimes attorneys will do a quadro off of a retirement account just to pay their fees at the beginning of a case.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I remember talking to another attorney who was saying, the reason that in theory, right, the attorneys that have been practicing longer, that their fees were higher, was because that they were more experienced and could get it done in a shorter period of time. That was kind of, her perspective on why it had gotten that way. But then what would happen, right, is you'd have these highly contested cases where they would hire the expensive attorney because it seemed like they were going to get better service or a better outcome. And the only thing is that they're charging at a higher rate. It doesn't mean that things are going to happen faster. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you're going to get a better outcome or that your attorney is going to be even, better.
Yeah. And really, what's sad is that some of those rates are based on how contentious the other person's attorney is. So, like, if one person hires this person who files a bunch of motions that are ridiculous or don't make any sense or are very protracted, that someone who is known for making it more protracted than it needs to be, then the other attorney will automatically upcharge, knowing what they're going to have to deal with for that attorney. And it's like, we are on this trained to where, I know you're saying that in each individual state they've made things more fair because they have these laws. Well, the laws, first you have to get into the courtroom, and that means you have to pay to play.
That's right.
And that is a big threshold now. And I'm trying to, through my work, through collaborative, through helping people understand settlement options, not everything is fit for settlement. Some things are not fit for settlement. That's what court's for. But I just want America to be awake. I want you to be able to understand these are all of your options. Now you can make a decision now that you know. We just need to make sure people are informed.
Yeah.
And especially, what are going to be the statistics of what happens to you and your children if you choose litigation?
Right. I mean, I am not opposed to alternative dispute resolutions. I think it can be a really good fit. I think there's things though that have to come into play with that, right? Like
Yes.
we have to know that there are four different in its simplest form, right? Four different pathways. Pro se, meaning you don't have attorneys, mediation, litigation, and collaborative,
Right.
right? And those are four fairly distinct paths.
Right.
And I think, one of the things that I have heard most often, and I'm sure you've heard this too, and I'm sure people that are listening, women that are listening have heard this as well. Well, you don't want to do collaborative because, if it doesn't work, then you have to start over. And then, you each have to get different attorneys. Okay. But
big thing people say for sure.
Right. But here's my take on it. First of all, if you're finding the right process truly for the right individuals from the beginning, and the collaborative process actually works, then the chances of it actually going off of the rails should be very minimal.
Very minimal.
Right? Because you've got the right people, the right process, the right team of people. I mean, I have never had a collaborative process not work. Exactly. I think it's one of the things that people say to defer people, like, well, I don't want to have to start over.
Right. It's a fear factor. There's so much fear mongering.
Totally.
Totally. That's what it is.
Totally. And if we think about, each of the different options, right? I mean, I think, and I don't know what you've seen, but I feel like mediation has also gotten a lot of wind under its sails because people are like, well, I want it to be amicable. I want to just have conversations. I don't want to rock the boat. But they don't actually understand what they're getting into when they sign up for that. They don't fully understand that you don't have counsel. You don't have an attorney who's representing you. And the person who is part of your process, who's the mediator, is committed to the process. Mm-hmm. To which I say, and what about the people? Like the mediators aren't supposed to really care about the outcome. They're just supposed to care about getting people through the process. And I feel like that's a huge disconnect for the people that are having those conversations, because they're looking at like, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? What should we do? Can you give us some options? And the mediator's like, can't tell you. Okay, well, then we're going to just sit here and spin around, and stay in this really frustrating spot. So I always encourage people to look at the different pathway and say, what's going to be the best fit for you? Not what's going to be the cheapest, not what's going to be the best fit. Because if it's the best fit, it should be the most value in exchange that you're going to get for what you're paying for, because you picked the right option for you.
Yes. See, and the thing is I've never had a case fail in collaborative. Now, I have had cases where people have paused and come back later. I have had cases where people switched collaborative attorneys. Like they took this set of collaborative attorneys. They were like, these people don't work for me, and we're going to get this set of collaborative attorneys. But every single one of my cases has always resolved in collaborative. And I think the thing that people get fed about, well, if you do collaborative, then you have to start over. Yes. But I will say, even of the cases that have to start over, they've at least come to some agreement in collaborative, whether it's just the custody part or just the financial part, and they have to go litigate custody or they have to go litigate the financial part. Generally, there's some work that has been done, And so I just don't know enough cases personally, and there's not been a study done of actually what cases are actually able to succeed in collaborative. It also does depend on, is the attorney that you're hiring committed to collaborative? So here's my advice. The person that you are looking at on the other side of the desk from you, you need to feel like they have your same goals.
That's right.
Do they mimic or do they imitate your values? Do they imitate your goals? Do they imitate your needs? What is that person on the same page with you? That's the first part. If you're going to go just hire the most bulldog attorney ever, but then you also want it to be the fastest process and you want it to be the cheapest process, and you also want to make sure that your kids are going to be totally okay, all those things don't come together in one package. You've got to kind of parcel in your mind, well, if I'm going to take this crazy aggressive approach and then his response or her response is absolutely outlandish, well, but if you took an outlandish approach from the beginning and their response is outlandish, didn't you kind of set it up for that? And then additionally, I think it just needs to be like a global picture of what is it that you're putting into the process versus, and what is it giving back to you? Because what are you putting in? Are you hiring a private investigator? Well, then don't be confused if you're also being looked into.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Well, and I think it comes down to like boundaries, right? I mean, I feel like there's a way to show up and have clear boundaries and expectations and accountability without ticking everybody off. I mean, it's like
Yes.
you can have an aspect of some flexibility, but
Mhm.
at the same time, we also have to have those boundaries. Like if we're asking, for example, for documentation, right? And we're assuming that the other party is going to comply
Mhm.
within a reasonable period of time, and they haven't, and we've asked and we've given them more time. At some point, we got to draw the line in the sand
Exactly. And go to court.
and go to court. Like there
Yes,
has to
100%.
be these very clear
100%.
boundaries.
Yes. But it needs to be set out front. It needs to be, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to try collaborative. And if we don't get the documents by this time, then we're not going to schedule the first session. If you don't schedule the first session, then you haven't signed your pledge. There are ways for you to not then restrict your attorney from representing you going forward if the person's not going to be forthcoming. You shouldn't be restricted from your process if the person wasn't ever going to be forthcoming enough to be in collaborative anyway. And there are ways to know that. You know what I'm saying? So in essence, this would look like this. Everybody agrees they're going to hire collaborative attorneys. In North Carolina, we have NC-CAN, which is like a nonprofit that shows people, these are all the collaborative attorneys in the state. And it's for both spouses to be able to sit down and look at together, which is kind of the point of it. So you choose, okay, I want to do this attorney, you're going to do this attorney. Well, we get into it and we're gathering documents for the first session. At the first session, everybody gets all the documents. That's how you get to be on the same playing field. And then you just go through, what do we have? That way you can kind of set a standard, right?
Yep.
And you sign the pledge. The pledge is what restricts the attorneys from going to court. Well, if we're trying to do document exchange, we haven't scheduled the first session yet. We haven't signed this pledge. The other person is being non-responsive. They're not giving their documents. The documents they are giving are completely and utterly redacted. We're getting a vision of this person is not being transparent. Okay, I'm going to need you to correct all of that because transparency is part of the collaborative process. Please send me the documents that are not redacted. Please send me these documents. We have a deadline. I need them by this date. They don't respond. Okay, now I'm switching you because you're no longer applicable for collaborative. You need to either go into settlement negotiation where there's no pledge that's going to restrict your attorney from going with you, or we need to switch you over into litigation track. You need to go ahead and file so you guys can go into mandatory mediation. Do you see what I'm saying? But the further we go down this path, when everybody starts to get on the same page of, if I don't respond and I'm not, upfront with my documents, then I'm going to go into litigation. Then people
Yeah,
will start either they'll do what they're supposed to do and they'll be transparent, or they'll end up in litigation, which is the appropriate place for someone who's not willing to be
that's right.
transparent.
That's right. Absolutely. I totally agree. So do you know, I know that in the past when I was part of the collaborative group, like I'm an advocate for collaborative. I've gone through the training and all that kind of stuff. But I knew a couple years ago they were looking at doing a study on, collaborative process versus traditional litigation or whatever, and to come up with some kind of dollar amounts. And I don't know where that ever landed. Do you know if they were ever able to kind of finish that study?
No,
Okay.
because the studies really started to focus, all the research really started channeling what was happening to children as a result of litigation. And so almost all of the money for a long time went to those studies, which we have a lot of numbers around that. There's also been a lot of studies around like productivity, like what parents' productivity losses at work and how much they're out of court and how that equates into dollars for employers so
Yep.
that they can assist in helping people to figure this out faster because of kind of
Right.
the disaster on the back end. And so I think I've not ever come to an understanding of that. I think the biggest hiccup in that is there are so many versions of collaborative, like so many different attorneys practice different, some people require the full process where you have a financial person and a therapist and everybody's involved in the full process. Some people, don't require there to be a pledge signed, which is not true collaborative. And then, there's such a range. So I don't think that there have been any true numbers. I think that would be incredibly helpful for a lot of people because distinguishing between mediation and collaborative already is very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so, for the listeners that haven't heard of collaborative, even though it's been around for decades, right? Share, can you share just a little bit of kind of the 30,000 foot view of, as a, dispute resolution method? What is it?
So collaborative, I feel like is a little bit more evolved settlement negotiation. That's what I say. So we knew in grade school that the telephone game did not work, right? So if you tell someone something and they tell the next person when it gets down the line, that person has no idea what you said. Okay. So when you tell your attorney something and your attorney tells the other attorney and that attorney tells your spouse, Kind of the same thing, even though I can't believe I'm having to like reteach this lesson. So what we want to avoid is doing that, because that makes no sense, especially when you're paying the person that you're telling that 300 to, $900 an hour. And so what we want to try to do is break that down a little bit. And so in collaborative, essentially what you're doing is everyone is committed to settlement. You are committed to the process, which is a transparent process. The attorney that you're hiring cannot take you to litigation after you've signed the pledge, but you're going to do an efficient settlement communication, which means you're going to sit in the same room or you're going to be on a Zoom conference together, and you're going to communicate directly so that you can avoid that triangle and we can all hear the same information at the same time. They're 2-hour sessions. You generally never have more than 3 2-hour sessions unless you have an incredibly difficult, you also own businesses together in addition to your marriage. And so it's efficient. You're able to, everybody sit down, communicate the same information once. You don't have to communicate it 3 times. The agreement is reached, it's drafted, everybody goes through the draft of the agreement together, they sign together, done. It's an efficient process. Generally takes around 4 to 6 months. Settlement negotiation is like you're on a car lot. I'm going to offer one thing, the other person's going to offer the other extreme. We're kind of going to work our way down to somewhere in the middle there. There are no time frames. It takes a very long amount of time because you're, again, doing that telephone game breakdown. Mediation is different because when you're sitting in the room, the person cannot give you legal advice. So that's a big problem. Now, if you're in attorney-driven mediation, then you may be sitting with your attorney and a mediator. Well, now, why are you not just paying for collaborative? Because then you wouldn't have to be paying for the mediator. Do you see what I'm saying? It's cheaper than attorney-driven mediation. And so those are kind of the options. And of course, litigation is, you can't communicate at all. You can only deal with some independent third party analyzing your entire life for 3 hours and then making a decision.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's, I think ultimately, right, the good news is there are options.
Very much so.
And it's just a matter of finding the right option for that specific situation.
Or doing your best. It may be that you try to do collaborative and the other person won't commit.
That's right.
There is nothing you can do about that.
That's right.
Like you can't beat yourself up over it at night. There was nothing you could do. Now, can you sit down with websites like NCCAN if you have one, or IACP, to sit down with your spouse? If you have that level of communication, you may not. I don't know, depends on where you're at on the spectrum. Sit down and say, hey, look, we could save a lot of money doing it this way. We would barely be able to help our kids, avoid a lot of hostility and conflict if we did it this way. And additionally, we would be able to save a lot of time if we did it this way, if we both committed. Do we feel like we could commit to this? Do I think that that's a worthwhile conversation? 100%. Are you in a place to be able to have that conversation? I have no idea. Personally, you may not even be able to be in a place to have that conversation with this person. And if you're not, then that is, you just kind of have to control the things that you can and let go of the things that you cannot. And that's kind of a life lesson there,
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we've talked a little bit about, the history. Let's talk a little bit about the cost. So what's data showing us average cost wise?
So across the United States, the average is about $35,000 a person. Now that's the whole United States. That really takes into account, and the only reason it's as low as that, because I can tell you that that's not the norm, is because it takes into account a lot of people who are doing just a regular uncontested divorce filing at the end of the year. They're not actually splitting any property or child custody or support or any of that. In the areas that I practice in, the general average is about $65,000 a person. And
oh my gosh.
And there have been cases, if you watch the documentary Divorce Corp, I mean, the amount of attorney's fees that people spend, you could not even truly imagine, really. And when I say, I know of cases where each side has spent $300,000. I don't mean the property settlement. I mean purely in attorney's fees. And so that's a college fund, that's a retirement account, that's a big deal, and so to spend that level of attorney's fees, you want to make sure that you really analyze what that means that you would need to get as a return if you're going to spend that amount of attorney's fees. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, and I think the I think that's the part that, again, the data that I have seen, and it's not been nearly as intense and, research based as yours, but I mean, just generally speaking, right? At one point, the average amount was 15 grand per person, right? Well, it's obviously continued to go north of that significantly. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, one is, the billable hour, right? It's hard to keep track in your mind how much time you've talked to them. And if they're working on cases behind the scenes or whatever, it's hard. It's hard to know that your case is actually being worked on. I mean, I had a client who had, attorney fees that had kind of built up in early November, no, mid-November. By mid-December, she got another bill for twice as what that was in November. But the problem was, like, she wasn't even returning the client's emails. Like, there were so many things that I'm like, how could we have that much work and you're not even communicating with the client? Like, it just was crazy to me. So, I think it is one of those things where because there isn't a cap on how much, it's kind of like, you know, people can just continue to move forward, and the more fighting and the more contention and the more whatever, the higher the legal fees.
It's it's a very aggressive incline when you're graphing.
Yeah.
If you were to graph the course of attorney's fees and like how fast you dwindle down that account, it is a very aggressive curve.
Yeah.
For speaking in financial terminology, but
Right.
I think that, it's something that people don't have enough information about, and that's what we're trying to spread is awareness around that. I think it's important for people to look at what it costs, look at and call about what those retainers are going to be for yourself. The thing about collaborative is that we really, a lot of that is based on a flat fee scenario, and so that's something that's very attractive to people. So it's not, we don't do trust accounting with our fees for collaborative. Now I can't speak for everybody, but in general, most collaborative practitioners are not doing a trust account. They're doing some sort of fee alternative.
Yeah.
That's attractive to people. Additionally, if you're both having collaborative attorneys and these people are not going to court and are committed to staying out of court, then they're not dealing with the court docket, which is protracted, so like I'm not governed by the court system, but if I'm in a case with someone who is governed by the court system, the case is automatically going to take me 9 months instead of 6 months just because I'm dealing with their calendar.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? They don't have as much control over their calendar. That's not their own fault. And now that we've had COVID and all of this stuff, I mean, these calendars, I can't even begin to tell you. Like, you can't even see a judge for a year in most counties now. So what are you going to do in between then and now?
Right.
Versus you could have been done with your collaborative case by now.
Right.
So it's just interesting. It's an interesting dynamic, and I advise people to get as much information as possible. Look at resources, figure out what the timeframes of your court are. Figure out, ask your attorney, what am I looking at? Tell me timeframes. Get that in an email to yourself. What are these timeframes we're looking at? You can set up with your attorney before you communicate with the other attorney. Like, I don't want you to communicate past this number of times. I mean, you can try that type of stuff. Some of that does go over, it doesn't go over, but it's just really important to know who you've hired is someone who has the same values that you do.
Well, when I think about it, right, from a business perspective, in a sense that if you were to put together, right, like the independent contractors that are working for me, I will say, hey, here's how much I'm approving for time. If you bump up against that, circle back with me. Let's talk about what you might still need, and I'll either approve it or not, right?
Yeah.
Not just, oh my gosh, I got a bill. And the thing is, it like just perpetuates women's fear, right, around money because you don't want to open it, right? Like, we've all had that attorney bill where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even, like, you slowly open it and like peek in, like, oh my gosh, how much is it? Right. And
because you have no idea.
Because you have no idea.
So wild. Yes. Versus like, it's not like that in other contexts.
Right. Right. It's just, it is so frustrating. And I think that, anytime we're making a purchase, we're never going to say, hey, here's a revolving open credit card and just charge whatever you need and do whatever you need. Like, this doesn't even make sense. Right. Oh, it's just
No,
crazy
it
to me.
doesn't. It does not make sense in a lot of ways. That's, but
No.
I will say the industry is changing, but it's not the industry changing. Here's what I want to say. Here's what I want people to hear me say. You have a unilateral choice to go to that system and involve yourself in it. The court does not come to your door, knock on your door, pick you out of your house and drag you into it. You go to it. If you avoid going to it, it does not cost what it costs to go to court. That's just, this is just common sense. And so I
Yeah,
think most people don't understand that they don't have to go to the court to make these decisions. They think that that's what has to happen, but it is not what has to happen. You have other options.
that's right.
Explore those. Make sure you give yourself an understanding of what are truly all of the options.
Yeah.
And there are ways to choose an attorney who has those restrictions like you're talking about, like for
Yep.
instance, at my office, you pay a bundled amount. And when that amount is exceeded, you choose whether you're going to rebundle or not. You see what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
there's no continuation of fees without someone saying that they're going to be doing that. And so it's I think transparency is a very important piece of it. Again, because I'm so committed to this and because I know how broken the system is, I want to be as transparent as possible so that my clients start to kind of dig out of this fear factor around divorce.
Agreed.
When we can start to get rid of that is when we can start to make this a little bit easier of a process.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, so one of the other things that we could
Oh,
talk
one
about, I know,
other point I wanted to
yeah,
make, I'm so sorry, is
yeah, go
that
ahead.
think about court is you come up with all the things you disagree on first versus settlement. You figure out all the things you agree on, and then you only deal with the things that you disagree on. Just if you think about how opposite that is, it's kind of wild. And if you think only about the things that you disagree on first, it is a way harder to get to the things that you do agree on. Versus if you come up with all the things that you do agree on, and then you're just dealing with the things that you don't agree on, that is a natural process of hammering down. It makes you feel like you've made progress. The litigation system is built to make you feel like you have made no progress because
Mhm.
you really do not make progress at first on purpose. You go through everything that you could possibly not agree on first. Well, that is only going to inhibit your progress to the things that you do agree on. I
Right.
mean, in
That makes
litigation,
sense.
you may start off totally understanding that I'm going to take my car and he's going to take his. But by the end of it, you're like, I want your car too, and the new set of tires. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, I know it is. And I can see that. I mean, and I think, and that's a good insight too, because I have seen some attorneys that'll do that. Like, hey, let's just, let's get the stuff that we agree with out of the way first, so we can
Yes.
kind of check those off the list. Sometimes it even requires putting together, a partial agreement just so that they officially can kind of move on from those specific items and then move on to the things that people disagree. And I think ultimately, I think the main part of it is there probably are more things that they agree on than they disagree. It's
Right.
just that the things that they disagree are so like ever thorn on everybody's side or the loudest noise in the room that it distracts from everything else.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's the
yeah,
more you can look at it in a business context, the better.
yeah,
Like you got to have those man in the mirror moments with yourself and heal from this, but not right now. Put that in a box. Like right now, you need to focus on the finances, get done with that, then put yourself back together emotionally and relationally. I wish people would hear me. Please stop trying to fix your broken heart while you're also trying to figure out what your bank account is going to look like. Get this done, then focus on the rest of it because that is a long-term healing process. Your broken heart, long-term. You need to like really spend some time like man in the mirror looking at yourself. How did you get to this place? What was your contribution? All of that stuff. I do that, but really focus on getting the financial piece done and then move on with that other part of it. I think so many people try to do it all at once. And it is very difficult to think through that many different types of processing. An emotional, personal, self evolution thought process, totally different than a business P&L thought process. Do you see what I'm saying? And for most people to use both parts of that while also trying to live their normal existing life and raise their humans that they're raising, like it's too much. And if you'll kind of I'm getting separated. These are my incremental steps. I'm going to produce all my documents. I'm going to figure out what all we have. We're going to have these financial conversations. I'm going to finalize this agreement. Then I'm going to start putting myself back together. You know what I'm saying? Like your brain can wrap itself around that. And also when you drive and you're in your car, you have to look 30 yards down the road. That is the same thing in a divorce process. Please do not look at the hood of your divorce process or the yellow and white line of your divorce process that's on either side of you. If you do that, you're just running your car into the ditch or you're getting in a wreck because you rear-ended the person in front of you. You have got to think 20 to 30 yards down the road so your brain can automatically start getting you there. That's how your brain processes information in every aspect. So it's important during the divorce process to be thinking about, okay, not just what process am I going to have, but it's my goal to keep the house because that's going to be the best school district. And so I need to do that. And the kids need to do this. And this is what would be best. And think about what is it that makes the most amount of sense for your life. Then let's try to work towards that. Do you see what I'm saying? But until you even think about what that's going to be, you have no direction. And you're wasting your attorney's time if they're like, hey, well, did you want to sell the house? Okay, well, now you want to keep the house, but now you wanted to refinance, but now you want to sell it again because you realize you can't refinance it. Well, did you just spend 5 hours of your attorney's time to come up with that when you should have called your banker to begin with?
Right.
And pay
or me.
300. Yes, exactly. Or your financial advisor. Like, get your people involved that you need and understand who does what for you so that you can understand this person doesn't need to be spending money on this. And also, what can you do for yourself? What can you start to understand for yourself and do for yourself to be the captain of your own baseball team? Because if nobody's cheering you on, then if you're not doing it, then nobody is.
Well, and I think that, obviously the house, right? It's a big piece of the whole picture. And I think the hardest part for that is women usually want to keep the house, not always. And yet it's a matter of back engineering to say, okay, let's pull in the right people. Let's have the conversations. Let's crunch the numbers. I will never tell somebody right out of the gate you can't afford it, but I'm also going to tell them you can afford it. I'm going to say, listen, let's get the numbers. Let's look at where that lands, because have there been stay-at-home moms who have been able to keep the house? Yes. Have there been stay-at-home moms that haven't been able to keep the house? Yes. Are there people that are working that can't keep the house? Yeah. I mean, it's like, so each situation, we really got to crunch the numbers and just see where it lands. And it's like, I always tell people like, okay, let's just get the information first before you commit to an outcome. Because then, particularly as women, right, if we say, hey, he can keep the house, and then you decide later, like, actually, I think I could afford it. We crunch the numbers. You say, yes, you can. And you're like, oh my gosh, but now I feel like I've already committed to an outcome. And we create extra angst in ourselves as women because we want to honor our word. And I think it's very difficult financially to take a look at all of the pieces segmented. Like we really have to look at the whole picture because they are all interrelated. And we have to look at, okay, it's not just about one party giving. There has to be, okay, in exchange for that, what am I getting in exchange? Something's really important to you. This is really important to me. That's negotiation. It's not, hey, I'm just going to give them everything because I want to be done with it. Right. Or I want all of this because I felt wronged and whatever. There's so many pieces to that. But I think there is an aspect of the action. And I get what you're saying with it. I mean, there's this aspect of the emotional part is part of the process. But for the women that can just start taking action, whatever that is, maybe it's cleaning out a closet. Maybe it's trying to get a handle on, what's really important to them. Whatever, right? They can start taking some action in that regard. They actually seem to be doing better versus the people that are stuck over here.
Your brain needs something to work on. It knows you have anxiety. It's like, what do you want me to do? Give me a job. Give me a job. What do you want? Give it to me. Tell me. It's like that dog when you put the backpack on it and it's like, I have a job now, like your brain is like, tell me, please tell me what I could be working on. But most people shut that down because they're just so afraid to give their brain something to think about because they think it's some sort of commitment. It's not. You're exploring options,
That's right.
And so I think it's such a big deal. And, one thing that just having this conversation, I think would be so beneficial for people. If they come to see someone like you, they go run through all of these numbers. They feel so much better when they're coming to the attorney. They are spending so much less money with the attorney because the attorney is not helping them figure out all this work that could be done ahead of time.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? The attorney is getting them to a place that they want, not, well, what do you want? Okay, well, let's figure out what you want. Okay, I'm trying to force you to figure out what you want because most people do not like committing to that thought process. It's scary because they're like, well, what if I tell you I want this and then I want to change my mind, like you said, which you can totally do.
Right.
So I think having done that mental work but always giving yourself, when you're in this level of an anxiety situation, something to be doing and thinking about. And I would say, if you're going to clean out a closet, you need to be looking for some bank statements. Like, there are so many things that you could be doing to get your life organized on this. Please stop spending time going and doing things that are not going to help you. Like, if you are truly going through this part of your life, you are saying, I am going to have a start over. I'm going to have a redo, which means that you need to think, I am building a house. I need to lay a foundation. I need to pour cement. That means you need to, what do I make? What is my budget? What are my goals? What am I trying to achieve in 5 years? That has to be a part of your foundation, or you're building on sand again, and you're probably going to get the same result that you're in right now. And do you see what I'm saying? Like, if that's what choice you're making, if you're saying, I'm going to go through with this separation, or this is being chosen for me, somebody else has decided this for me, that's always a big part of it. But it means this is a new life moment for you. This is a brand new life, and it can look exactly like you want it to, but you have to mentally think through that for yourself right now. And if you don't think through that right now, you will not get to that place where, if you think through it now, I can help you get to that place. You can help. You got a lot of people working for you right now, bankers, real estate people. So many people are involved in the process of a divorce transaction. If you know exactly what it is that your long-term goals are, all those people are now putting their energy into helping you get to your long-term goal versus just watching you spin around, not knowing which way you want to go. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, and I think to your point, right? Like, I found this quote and I just absolutely love it. And it basically says, don't underestimate the power of women to find shit out, because once they know, know what they're looking for, they find bank statements, they find credit cards. They're like, oh, look what's in the shredder bin. Oh, look I found Viagra in the back of his truck. That wasn't for me. Like, oh, look, there's a doctor bill. What is that? Like, they all of a sudden start to really kind of have their radar on, and they just find things. And unfortunately, or fortunately for them, right, the men underestimate how resourceful and smart and perceptive that women actually are. So you're right. Like, hey, if you're going to organize the office, right, great opportunity. Like, I've had plenty of women that have said, I'm not quite ready to file. Great, it's almost tax time. This is such an easy time right now to basically say, hey, I'm just gathering stuff. I want to get stuff organized. I really want to get, tidy up the office, get the statements filed, blah, blah, blah. Perfect. Nobody's going to argue with that because you have a legit reason.
Yes. And you should, you know what I'm saying? Like, before you get ready to file, I wish people would start to understand it's before you get ready to commit. Like, it needs to be, I've consulted with an attorney a long time ago, just so I can know, like, what am I even possibly going to be thinking about? I've gotten all of these documents in order. I have my own binder. I've thought through, this is my plan. I've thought through, this is my budget. You see what I'm saying? That's when you're ready. Of course, most people are like, I've got to just have that feeling emotionally to say yes, to file. And I'm like, no. That's when you start calling your attorney and being like, okay, like, I need to know, what are my process options? Right. Okay. Now I need to analyze my process options. Okay. Now I need to get all my documents in order. You know what I'm saying? Now I need to call the people who are going to be helping me.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? I think when people start to understand that becomes way more digestible than, I need to get to a place where I have this moment in my mind and soul that says I am done with this marriage and I am ready to file a lawsuit. To try to make that moment in your mind happen it is mental torture to try to say, okay, I'm willing to, that's a lot packaged in that one little statement. You know what I'm saying? But most people think that that's what they have to be ready to do when they have that feeling.
Yep.
And I think that if they can back the train up a little bit, it's easier to think through appropriately.
Well, and I think that the thing with that too is basically, when we think about, like, there has to be this moment, there are times when all of a sudden, like, people are like, yep, I'm done now. Right. But at the same time, I think as human beings, right, we often feel like there has to be this one defining moment where stuff hits the fan and then I'm doing it. Well, we don't have to wait to have our back against the wall, having our life absolutely miserable. I always say, like, we don't have to be half dead before we're like, okay, a gift.
Exactly.
Like we need to be the proactive part. People that can start planning that there's oftentimes people will reach out months before they're even ready to file. And I'm like, great, this is great. Because guess what
Yes.
we can do? We can help you get everything organized. We can put together the documents. We can interview the attorneys. We can help so when you're ready to file, literally everything is all queued up.
Yes. Yes.
And if your husband happens to file in the meantime, you're ready.
Exactly. And one thing that in the top 10 things powerful people do, one of the biggest things is to love yourself is to set yourself up for success tomorrow. Do you see what I'm saying? The most amount of love you will give for yourself is to think about yourself tomorrow and what you can do to love yourself before you even get to tomorrow, so that tomorrow is easier. And if you think about that in terms of what you just said, to really take care of yourself in this process is to be prepared. That is what will take care of you more than anything else. Just like you just said, if everybody were to play it through just like you just described, it would be so much less anxiety for all parties involved. And what I'm very concerned about is ultimately that flows down to your children. And ultimately, my goal is to fix this next generation of children so that they're not broken like I am from my parents' divorce and all the, there's a way for us to do it and there's a way for us to not do it. And if you can settle your own self down and your husband or wife down to be able to, come to a place where you can have less anxiety because you have pre-prepared yourself for this, that's trickling down onto everyone else that's involved in this, which includes your children.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we've covered a little bit on the history. We've talked about the cost of divorce along with a host of other things. But one of the other things that I want to wrap up our time with, which I know isn't like a fun topic to talk about.
It's an interesting one, though.
It's an interesting one
right now.
It is. And so that is alimony. So I think there's a couple things with that I'll tee up, and then I definitely, want your input. I'm curious on what the stats are. I know that there are some states that we work in that, there really isn't much of a maintenance conversation.
Right.
There are some where they have specific calculations and it's pretty black and white. And then we have some others that is very subjective and whatever. So talk to us a little bit about the trends that you're seeing on your end related to this conversation.
So I was just bringing up, because I just wrote a blog on the fact that women are starting to pay more alimony than ever before now. And so I was going to bring that blog up so that you said you wanted some recent stats.
Yeah.
But I will say that when it comes to alimony, there's a supporting spouse designation and there's a dependent spouse designation. And so there is not, like in the state of North Carolina, there's not a specific alimony calculation like there is child support. It's very different than child support in that most states don't have a very specific calculation. Now, there is the American Matrimonial Association's calculation, and a lot of states follow that. And that calculation is pretty interesting. It is about 30% of the payor minus 20% of the payee, and then you see, how that flushes out and go from there. In North Carolina, there's 16 factors, which include, like, did you assist while he or she went to school? Were you a part of the education? Did you pay for bills while they were, in getting a promotion? Those types of things. And so those are part of the 16 factors. And so alimony is a very tricky thing, but I think one of the biggest part is that now there's this new phase where women are making more money, women are so much more educated, and now women are paying men alimony. So this calculation, what I want women to know, is not just for men to pay women. It is across both lines.
What's interesting about that is the factors. Okay. So as part of my CDFA credential, right, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, we go through the factors, and that was part of, the certification process. Okay. My frustration with that is I don't feel like people take it serious. Like, let's just say hypothetically that we have somebody and it's all 16 factors. Like, yep, that one and that one and that one and that one. And then it's still subjective. And you're like, okay, but all the factors are there. Like, it's still one of those things where I think we need to come back, at least from my perspective and the work that we've been doing on the negotiating side with clients, has been building on this foundation, kind of like you were saying before. Like, we have to have the cement poured. We have to have the foundation. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, what's that foundation? It's the budget. It's
Mm-hmm.
knowing how
Big
much you
time.
need to, big time. We have to know what our target is on what needs to be coming in. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, whatever the monthly expenses are, and let's just say the income is from, coming in from a W-2, and then we've got child support, which is usually a straight calculation, and then we're still in the red. It could mean like, okay, well, we need a certain portion of that to come from maintenance. We need a certain portion of that to come, and I'm going to help you go back and negotiate to your employer so we can get you a raise, which has worked
Uh-huh.
every single time.
Yes.
And where else could you be generating some income from? So it's not necessarily like, oh, the ex-spouse has to be paying all of it. I mean, but we also need to recognize the fact that that needle, we can move it and we need to be moving it. Like there's been
Mm-hmm.
so many times where I'll go back and they'll come to the table on the support and say, hey, I'll give her X amount of dollars. And I said, no, we need it to be Y. And usually they'll say, okay, because I can back up the reason why we're asking it, which is in alignment with the factors, right? But it's not quite as simple as using those factors as a checklist and then great, you qualify. Um, it's so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so frustrating, but I think if we can have the right information and the right strategies and the numbers and have the conversation and, there's options around the maintenance. It's okay, how much, how long, um,
So I was looking at the article. The original article was with the Washingtonian and the Washington Post, and so it went into women were paying up to $1,000 a month in the Washington and DC, the DC and Virginia area, um, and it even for women who were married for only a year and 2 years,
wow,
and they ended up
interesting.
turning around and having to pay their spouses because they were making more money than he was.
Okay, that makes me irritated. Only because if the roles were reversed, most likely, at least what I've seen, those short-term marriages, the ex-husband is not
Exactly.
paying alimony for goodness sakes.
For the short-term marriages, they are
No.
not, and that's what this one of the family law attorneys was saying.
Mm-mm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's the other thing too, is that I have seen for the women that are listening that you're the higher income earner. The thing that I've seen that really the women that I've worked with, what has gotten in their way is a couple things. One is feeling like you have to overcompensate. Like, hey, I make more money, and we end up out of guilt or shame or whatever emotion is driving that, overcompensating for what your male counterparts would be doing if they were in the same boat. We need to stop doing that. We just need to stop doing that. Um, the second thing is, I think even more than ever, we are going to probably have to push back on some of that. We're going to have to rely on the attorneys to go back and say, okay, well, what have been other scenarios where when the roles were reversed, they weren't paying short-term maintenance, or they weren't paying alimony or maintenance for short-term marriages. Like, why am I having to pay it? Because historically, they haven't had to do it for under XYZ, length.
Yeah.
So I think that the negotiations, I think that at the end of the day, we as women need to have the right team of people and we have to show up to be willing and able to negotiate. Because even if things start to change, we're still going to have to negotiate. It's just going to look differently.
And so many times I hear from my clients, well, he always did that. He always did the cars. He always did this. What? And where did that get you? Like I can help you be strong and powerful and courageous, even if you feel small. I can make you feel large inside. I can help you do that. I can teach you what you can do to do that. Some women think that they're either born with my personality or with a scale of different personalities, but that is not true. As women, how much do we advocate for our children? Like if we're put into a corner, Mama Bear comes out. But you can do that for yourself. And this is just like flying on a plane. They say, do not put that mask on your kid first. You put it on you so that you can breathe and help the two of you. You have to be able to do that. This is the exact same concept.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the other part of it too, right, is when you have strong women, right, it's not, there's so many things that go into that, but it is usually women that have walked through really tough things that also had other people that were pouring into them along the way, and they went through their own journey and came out stronger. I was in a coaching program, gosh, probably like 15 years ago. And I remember, the group of women that were in there, 22 women from across the country, and they did this little exercise. And they said, okay, how many of you were assertive? Like, how many of you had a mom that was assertive or a dad that was assertive, like parents? Where were they on the assertiveness scale? Assertive meaning confident, set boundaries,
Yes.
show up, all that, right? And how many of you had passive or aggressive parents, right? And maybe they were passive and aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyways, of all of the people in that room, only one person said both my parents were assertive. She was the only person that as a kid could truly say, I was assertive because it was
Mm-hmm.
modeled for her, right?
Yes.
The rest of us, the other 21 successful women business owners that were in the room, were like, are you kidding me? No way. I was like totally passive, or I was totally aggressive. I was passive, hands down. Did not want conflict, didn't want any of that. And I remember even in college reading a book on communication, because that was my undergraduate degree. And I was like, I think I'm going to get sick. Like, just the thought of having to show up and challenge the status quo or have a voice. We get, right, how you feel. You feel
Yes.
so overwhelmed and you
Mm-hmm.
feel so anxious and so
Mm-hmm.
scared about that. And maybe even wanting to find a garbage can like I did, right? Like I was like, I can't even do this. I'm going to lose my cookies. Like, no, I'm not doing it. However, as we continue to do it, right, the easier it gets. And now anybody that's known me over the last 10 years would not see me any other way. I'm not passive. I'm not aggressive. I'm assertive. But it was a learned behavior.
Yes. Very much
And so
so.
I love that you brought that up, because that encouragement to say, listen, it is okay if you are feeling like you want to retract. It's okay if you're feeling emotional. It's okay if you're, having a hard time finding your voice. Let's get the right team of people
Yep.
that can walk alongside as you're developing that muscle, right? And you continue those skills beyond even the divorce process. And you're going to be, I mean, I have used that in so many situations, even within my business life, even within my personal life. It's totally transferable.
Yep.
If I look back and say, oh my gosh, do you realize how many of my colleagues when I was in the financial industry, male, powerful people that I stood up to and held my ground? And
It's a good feeling.
it was awesome. It was awesome. And you kindly are like, oh my gosh, I just did that. Like, okay. And then you go do it again. And then you go do it again. And so we are here, right, as women to support other women to say, listen, you can do it, and we're going to help you, and we're going to teach you some of these things along the way. There's so many life skills that go through the divorce process with us that if we're open to it, we have an opportunity to come through this journey stronger, more confident, more financially empowered, all the things.
Yep. That is my goal for everyone.
Right.
All of the women listening right now.
That's right.
And I want everyone to hear me say, I don't care who you are and what you've been through. I 100% believe in you. 100% believe in you with that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I know 100% you can achieve anything you put your mind to. I know it because I am a walking, breathing example of that. I am not supposed to be at this place that I am today and have achieved all that I have done. And even in this divorce sphere, what I have broken down and helped people to see is amazing. And I would have never thought that would have happened, but I kept going. And I think that it's important to know that there are so many people that will help you. There are so many people that will be there for you, but you have to find the right resources. It may not be the first person, and it may not need to be your attorney. You may not need to pay somebody that much money or rely on someone to teach you skills that doesn't have the education to be able to teach you those skills, and find the people who find the people who can walk with you, who can help you on this path, but also be looking out for yourself, because you've got to look out for yourself. You've got to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that it's an important piece of it. And I think that that's probably the most important piece of it, really. I'm glad we were able to simmer down into that.
It is. It really is. It really, really is. And so as we wrap up our time together, I know this has just been high energy. This has been awesome. This has just been you and me, real conversations about what the heck's going on out there. And I love that. And I have goosebumps multiple times throughout our conversations today. And I know that our listeners did too, right? So as we wrap up our time together, any, final thoughts, or maybe a quote or something that you often stand on, or a saying that you'll often say to your clients, that we could kind of wrap up with?
I think that, one thing that I want people to highlight about my journey that they don't necessarily know whenever they look at me or see where I'm at this place is when my mom left my dad, we went to government housing.
Hmm.
That is where we went. And I have gone from there all the way back up to here. And so I know that it seems terrifying to make these moves, but you got to believe in yourself.
That's
And
right.
if you believe in yourself, then that is what matters. And when you model that for your children, there is no greater thing that you can model for them than that
Yeah.
lesson right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Um, well, I just want to thank you so
Yeah.
much and oh, I know, right? Like just the emotion behind it. I know. It's powerful. And I think, when I look at the people that are in my sphere, that are in your sphere, that again, we're at the space because we understand more than we probably could ever articulate for our clients
Hmm.
that are in a tough spot. And I know the women on my team have been through a lot, and part of that is their fuel to say, listen, I've been in there. I
Oh,
know what you're
yeah.
going through, right? And I love that.
Yeah.
So thank you for your
Yeah.
time today. I really appreciate it. I know our listeners got a lot out of our time together. And then just be sure to mention here, where can people get your book again and
Yes.
give us the official title?
Yep. So it's The Cure for Divorce Culture. And then I have a podcast called Divorce Healthy that you can tune into and get all this encouraging information. And then the website is A&R Law. There's a lot of blogs. I mean, I blog about anything and everything that is current around this topic. I just think it's important because I want people to have as much information as possible around this industry because that's what it is. Don't forget, it is an industry. It is your personal life, but your personal life is being fit into an industry. So just think through what that means.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm accessible. If you have comments or questions, we have a team of people. We do try to answer those. Obviously, I can only give you legal advice if you're in the state of North Carolina. But other than that, we're here to be game changers in this industry and to really make it better. I'm committed to changing divorce in America. I already have in a lot of ways. Feel very good about what has happened since we've been on this mission. And